to get started. So hello and welcome to our inaugural webinar on digital leadership. I'm your host, Maz Hussain, and thank you for making the time to join us today. Hopefully you'll enjoy it and listen to future podcasts. I did make an announcement earlier. It's my first webinar, so I'm learning with all the new tools that I've learned literally overnight to kind of control, but a really interesting learning journey the last 24 hours. So look, the term transformation has been in the consulting world for many decades now. And then when we start thinking about the term digital's been around for quite a long time. Early 2000s, it started really prevailing and really pushing into the boardrooms as a real term that was important. But what we've seen in the last 18 months is those two words coming together and the emergence of kind of digital transformation being the one of the big key buzzwords in not just boardrooms, but in kind of every walk of life. Everybody's really thinking about digitization, digital transformation, whether it's within the organization or within society. And some of that we're going to talk about today. So this is me navigating as I move through different panels. So look, when we think about transformation, we're expecting in the magnitude of 6.8 trillion to be invested in digital transformation between 2020 and 2023. That's quite a significant amount. 4.5 billion of that is estimated to be invested, or the value of data and AI in the kingdom, specifically in terms of the economy and its size. Now, what we've found through our research is 70% of digital transformation projects are failing to reach their goals. That's just staggering from my perspective. It's a figure that I fell off my chair when I saw that. But what we have also found in our research is where there's a digital leader appointed, we're seeing 4.5 times more likelihood of them being able to realize their value and execute their ambitions against the overall strategy of the organization. So today we're going to talk a bit about digitalization and what it means and what it means to be a digital leader. And through the work that I've been doing over the last decade with organizations on this topic specifically, we've found that more and more the need to have leaders at the helms of helping to drive the transformation, the more chance and likelihood there is for the transformation to be successful. However, the digital leader, the question really comes is, where does the digital leader sit? Is it the IT lead or the CIO or the CTO, or is it in fact the functional expert that sits within the finance function or the procurement function or the HR function that should be considered the digital leader that's driving the transformation? And that's the topic we're going to talk about today. And we're really going to talk about it in regards to Saudi Arabia. So the kingdom is something that's really close to my heart. I think that what's happening in the kingdom today is hugely fascinating. I think that we have a really bold vision out in Saudi Arabia, and the sheer magnitude of the social and economic transformation that's being embarked on here in the kingdom is phenomenal. And I'd really like to spend some time to talk about it. Now, there's a lot of stuff happening in the kingdom, and I'm going to share some of this with the guests, because some of the guests won't be aware of this. But back in 2010, a platform was launched. The platform's called Absher. Now, I moved here in September, and I was just blown away by this platform, because the platform is a single platform that connects my driving license, my lease for my house, my bank account, my SIM card, right down to my visa coming in and out of the kingdom. You can literally go onto this one platform and monitor everything that I'm doing for myself and see the activities and be able to kind of manage my life on a single platform. And that was in 2010. Then we had the launch of the Vision 2030. Again, a significant, bold vision for the kingdom to transform both economically, but most importantly, socially as a kingdom. And then we've seen things like the launch of Saudi's Data and AI Authority. I I think it's massively fascinating. The reason I think it's fascinating is the first kingdom around the world that thought it important to anoint a minister for AI, and the seriousness that stands for, I thought was really important. And then finally, the approval of the DGA, which is the Digital Government Authority, to really oversee and govern, connecting both the citizens, government, and businesses together. So look, from my perspective, I think there's been a bold vision set, policies being put in place and approved to help enable the vision, investments agreed, so the money's been put into place. Now, what's left, in my view, is making that vision a reality, and I think that comes down to the leadership of individuals in driving that vision. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk a bit about and discuss the consideration digital leaders need to make and have to have in their mind as they start thinking about and driving their digital transformation for their organizations or their departments. So today I'm joined with a set of excellent speakers who will be my panelists today and helping me kind of grapple with some of these challenges. And if I can ask my panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about who you are and your backgrounds, that'd be fantastic. If we could start first with yourself, Mark, over to you.
Morning, everyone. I'm Mark Kennedy, and I'm Associate Professor of Strategy and Organization at the Imperial College Business School, and I'm also co-director of the Data Science Institute at Imperial. And I guess I'm a longtime data nerd. Background in computer science and philosophy, and started in a startup doing pattern recognition software early on, but then went into consulting and have been now in academics for, gosh, a while, 20 plus years. So that's me.
Great, thanks, Mark. Thanks for making the time. Thanks for getting up early for this one. Appreciate it. Hisham, can I pass to you?
Yes, thank you, Maz. Good morning, everyone, and good day for those who are from different time zones. Hisham Al-Ghamdi from Abdulatif Jamil, Group Chief Data and Analytics Officer, an experience of IT, digitalization, customer service, and recently been appointed to lead the data and analytics. Pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you.
Great, welcome, Hisham, and thank you for giving up your time to join us today. Lawrence, over to you.
Thanks, Maz, and hello, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me along to this session, Maz. So my background is that I'm a future of work architect. I'm also the founder of DigiWorks. My role is essentially to help large organizations achieve their digital aspirations. I've been working in this space for about the last 20 years. My actual specialism is around human and workforce-led transformations from a data and analytics insights perspective.
Right. Well, very warm welcome to all the panelists, and thank you very much for your time this morning. So looking forward to our discussion over the next hour. So let me begin a bit with the digital leadership model. So based on our research over the last 10 years, what we've realized is digital isn't going to just stop at one point and you can then set a vision and execute on it. Digitalization is really an evolution, and it's going to continuously change and continuously evolve, and components will continue changing. However, as we start thinking about digitalization and the need to empower more leaders to be able to help drive that change through the function and through organizations, we felt it'll be valuable to create a framework of the way you think about digitalization and the key considerations that you need to have across the different dimensions of digital, so you're able to understand the dimensions and how you start thinking about and talking to the different stakeholders within those dimensions. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes just explain the framework, but obviously, feel free to download the paper and that kind of go into the detail. It's broken into two parts. Is the framework. One is around the organization dimensions, and the second is the frames of thinking or the modes of thinking. I won't talk about the modes of thinking because I think they kind of speak for themselves. But when you start thinking about the different dimensions, you have four key dimensions. You've got the human dimension, and when we talk about human dimension, what we're talking about there is is the culture and the skills, right? So what mindset do you need, and what culture do you need to drive the change for your transformation? And then what skills do you have today, and what skills do you need in the future to drive that transformation? The second is the disruptive dimension, and the second dimension really focuses on technology and data. Now, this will continue evolving, but today, people are thinking about, from a technology perspective, cloud, IoT, and the various other technologies that exist. So that's all the sexy stuff, but actually some of the boring stuff is also important. So once you've got your MVPs going and you need to scale, it's how do you speak to your IT function and think about the infrastructure that exists and how you scale within that infrastructure. So that's the technology area, and then you've got the data. Data is continuously evolving, right? It's the security of the data, how you drive insights from the data, and how you connect data across your enterprise. The third dimension is really all around methods and business models. What we mean by methods is thinking about having a product mindset, thinking about the different tools that are available, like agile methods and design thinking, but then also right down to the kind of the business models, right? So how do you kind of seed, scale, and then scale, scale and sustain good innovative ideas for both your organization or new ideas that you're looking to drive outside your organization? And finally, the most seen to be the most boring, but actually the most important, commercialization dimension, which is really looking at the risk and the value realization. So every organization I talk to, and Hisham might talk a bit about this today as well, is it's all well and good understanding that you need the investment and you need to kind of drive digital, but then you need to negotiate and have a deal with your board and your key stakeholders around value realization and what that value looks like today and what it's going to look like in the future, and really important how you think about that. And then finally the risk, right? So the risk and reward model, how you think about it and what it looks like. So those overarchingly are the four big dimensions and the subsets within those dimensions. We won't be talking about all of those, but we will cover some of them in our conversation. And then when we think about the modes of thinking really are how you change from strategy to becoming a catalyst going into production. So strategy is really around how you think as a strategist and then look at execution through a product lens. And hopefully you'll get an opportunity to read the paper and delve more into the modes of thinking. So listeners and panelists, I'm actually supposed to have a poll question here, and this is where my polling has failed me. So I'm going to ask a question for the audience here, or the panelists really. Really from those modes of thinking, which of the four dimensions do you think organizations struggle with the most when it comes to digital transformation? And I'm going to let any one of you take your pick in answering that.
I guess I'll start and I'll say that, I think that many people these days are convinced that digital is a big deal and digitalization is something they need to do. But it's really not, we don't see the momentum and, the sort of definite action that goes with that hype. So if you were to point to a place and say, well, where is that going wrong? A few experiences that I've seen recently suggest that it comes down to not understanding kind of how to translate the methods into something that relates to something you already care about. So I think it's joining up what feels like the future to what's happening now. That's where people are kind of falling down.
Cool. So look, Mark, let me start with you, right? When we think about the disruptive dimension, how do you think you need to balance BAU with innovation? And how do you blend short-term goals with long-term strategy when it comes to digital, in your view?
So yeah, I guess that my answer is kind of a tip off to what I think about that. I mean, if you, I hesitate to say you want to go with business as usual, because that sounds wrong. Everybody's happy to talk about business unusual and that type of thing. But if you can't figure out how to relate the future to something that let's say your customers know how to care about, or your constituents know how to care about already, then you've got a lot of selling to do to say you should care about this. And I don't poo-poo that as a thing you don't want to do, but getting business as usual kind of somehow to play with this new stuff is a matter of picking part of what is the current business landscape or the current service landscape if you're a government, and say, you know, where is it that we could make a difference there? You know, so for example, you know, in the last year and a half, we've all learned how to work remotely and do meetings like this without being sat on a stage somewhere and getting on airplanes and all that sort of thing. And we had all these tools before, we just didn't use them as much. So there's an example of like business as usual changing. So we still are doing things like this, but we're doing them differently. And that's what I'm trying to say, is you've got to find something where you can make a difference with these digital tools that people are already wanting to do, and go for it.
Good. And Hisham, from your perspective, based on your experience, are leaders getting the balance right between prioritizing the right projects?
Yes, thank you, Maz. Prioritization today is, I would say, far different from what we used to have before the pandemic. The traditional approach of digitalization is you have always a big set of projects. The list could go beyond 100, and the ambition is usually high, but it gets what we call a leadership mix of prioritization, depending on the competition, depending on how fast you would like to reach your customers. Today, the shift, the pandemic is really happening on the basis of what exactly your customers, okay, are in need based on the circumstances of the pandemic of the COVID-19. So you're talking about paying without using any cards or cash. You're talking about specifically delivery, increased need of delivery today, and e-commerce as well. If you don't have your e-channels today, you're almost gone. We've seen companies disappear in the last maybe a year or two. They did not prepare for online selling. They did not have the right capabilities. They had a huge manpower cost. Efficiency was really a big matter for continuity. So today the prioritization comes from, I would call, this is our leadership phrase, action before perfection. It means you have to really respond to the needs urgently, and you have to mobilize your teams. We had teams working like sometimes 24/7 to get things done, and there's the sense of urgency is far different from what you used to have. So the blend of digitalization today, prioritization, is taking a mix of urgency, fast deployment, and as Mark highlighted, you have to do these things. It's not, you cannot be in what we call in a stable situation not responding to this. You have to really have to find the proper way of responding, connect with vendors, partners, your teams in different functions, and you have to get these things done. This is the prioritization happening today.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that's absolutely true. And Lawrence, from your perspective, how can leaders ensure that their portfolio of projects align to their core purpose and strategy?
Yeah, I think we often work with strategy in fairly broad and almost, overarching terms. And I think the ability to understand how you translate strategy into mission critical work, the actual activities and the workflows that are going to potentially create value in the future, has to be an area of focus. And I think, based on my sort of global experience of this, it's an area of opportunity for a lot of leadership teams to get a lot more granular about how strategy and work actually interrelate with each other, because I think out of that comes the opportunities and also the challenges which will enable you to prioritize some of those digital initiatives more effectively. But the other point I want to make, Maz, is that just another lens on this, I think prioritization is not just about what we go after as a digital outcome or a digital opportunity. It's about what we go after internally as an enabler. What do we prioritize internally about the things we need to do to get fit, to get ready, you know, to optimize our chances of delivering success? So I see prioritization as more than just the digital data, tech, AI elements of what we apply to our business model or to our business opportunity. I look at it inwardly and go, what do we prioritize in terms of things we've got to change about ourselves?
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I think that point really resonates with me, because it also speaks to, if you think about what I mentioned about the kingdom, right? The policies are in place, the investment's being made, you know, the vision's been set, but how do you push the kingdom, right? And then the organizations within it. And I think that comes down to kind of maybe more related to the culture aspect. So actually that leads quite nicely into my next question for you, maybe Lawrence, then in that case, around culture. What can leaders do to embed culture and mindset and skills to support digital in your view?
Well, if ever there was a big question, I mean, this is on the tip of the tongue of so many organizations right now. And I'm pleased to say that what I'm seeing is there's a real willingness to tackle this problem of mindset, culture, skills, capabilities head on. And I think it's to Hasham's point about now post-pandemic, this is no longer a nice to have. We're not really in experimentation mode anymore. We are in a world where digital is business and business is digital. But unfortunately, many of our cultures are still analog. And I think the way in which I see organizations that are effective at this approach it is that they move away from calling it culture change for a start, right? They're coming at it very much more from a much more systematic point of view, looking at methods, looking at some of the mechanisms, the processes, you know, the way in which things are actually been architected and designed, often to support very different models to what they're working to now. They also think about the meaning of what this is really driving. And I think that has to be reflected in digital leadership. And Maz, KPMG's paper on this was really insightful. And there was a phrase in there that I just wanted to reference back really, because I think it's really apt for this. Viewing digital is no longer about a job for an individual or for a team, but viewing digital leadership as a movement for the many has to be the bedrock on which you start driving the culture change needed within these organizations.
Yeah. No, I think, look, you're actually right, Lawrence. Our research found exactly the same thing. And this was the challenge, is when you kind of leave the work to one or two people, what you're finding is you're not able to create the movement to really start pushing the organization. And the reality is, if you want a full-blown end-to-end transformation, it's not a job for one person, right? It's complex, it's hard, there's a lot of work to do, there's a lot of moving parts, and without a team, it's going to be very difficult.
But Maz, that often comes up against, the rub is with one big factor, right, which prevents a lot of organizations moving to that sort of sense of movement with their people, and that is empowerment.
Yeah.
And the loss of perceived control, often from a leadership perspective, over many of the things which they've always inherently had their arms around. And I think empowerment in particular is a key word that sits behind this question.
Yes. So a question for you, Hisham, then, from a kind of a company perspective, what do you think leading companies in KSA specifically, and you being a leading company within the kingdom, are doing to transform culture and empower employees with digital skills and mindsets? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, thank you, Maz. Today, we could see a continuous education and change to how we respond to, let's say, specifically the pandemic, and then using the capabilities of digitalization. Now, the change in this kind of culture, of course, I would always say, what are the parameters today? You're usually going to have like social distancing, wearing masks. So this is all is what we could consider somehow a culture change. It's something we ask people to wear these things as a must. So the equal to this is actually how we respond to our customers through these digital channels. Today, we could see a boost in example in our automotive industry of you have to enable a digital channel between you and the customer, that being either by chat or through WhatsApp or through any kind of these technological messaging. And then you need to continuously be responsive to the customer needs in terms of notifications. So notifications in the sense of where's my vehicle today? Is it due for maintenance? All of this is all necessity that we have to mobilize our people to start responding. It's not the traditional world. I just keep saying this. The traditional of being disconnected. It's okay. We are a business that we don't need to be connected. It's different today. Everyone needs to be connected. The fourth industrial move today is about being connected, about smart devices connected 24/7. So this is the change we could see in people, the change in, I would say the youth, those who are coming from an age group of maybe 20 to 30, they're already part of this kind of culture. But if it's part of, let's say, a different age group or different generation, this is where the culture shift takes more capacity, more efforts to realize the importance of really being digital, being connected all of the time.
Good. Yes. So look, you made me think of something. I'm going to hold my thought for a minute because I'm really interested in understanding Mark's perspective, because I know this is something this is quite close to your heart when we start thinking about culture and change and how society works. So how important do you think culture is for allowing digital projects to reach their full scale and the value that organizations have set out or societies indeed are setting out to achieve?
Yeah, thanks, Maz. I mean, I'm really interested to hear the comments that we've all been having this morning, and Hisham and Lawrence, the interesting points you guys have just made. I didn't mention this earlier, but my academic specialty is cultural sociology, kind of applied to economics and organizations, and so I think about this all the time. And as an American living in London and a person who also grew up overseas as a kid, I mean, I don't know what culture I am anymore, but I think about it all the time, that's for sure. And we talked about earlier empowerment, and this is a lot to do with that. Like how, Michelle Galfin has a great book about culture and talks about loose and tight, and how cultures think about, when is it time to really control something versus when is it time to let people do their own thing. Whether it's a nation state, whether it's a people group, whether it's an organization, whether it's a functional unit within an organization, this is one of the dimensions of culture that's really distinctive and that matters. And it plays out in this digitalization thing a lot. So if you've got the kids, so to speak, and younger people than senior managers, let's say in their 20s, and they want to do something new, do they have the chance? What are the approval cycles like? How does that? I'm working with a company now that basically has had a long struggle to decide that it would be okay and that the company wouldn't fall apart to install Tableau. And I hear this story and I'm like, it just makes my head explode. Here are these really bright people who want to do great things, who are trying to get some ability to play with a new tool, which is not even. No disrespect to Tableau, but it's not that revolutionary and it's not super dangerous, but it's just very difficult to get sometimes past this feeling like my job is to control and make sure that nothing happens here that I don't understand or that's bad. And then this person coming along and saying that they can do something which I don't yet understand. So my answer is, let me think about it. No. And that's exactly what we cannot do. Somehow we've got to get past that.
Mm. And I think on that, Mark, I mean, are you noticing organizations looking to, whether it be a new product, whether it be a new service, something that may be perceived as a risk from initial perspectives, but they're creating controlled environments. They're creating the places where you can explore these things in a safer environment.
Yeah, I mean, having some sort of a digital sandbox type thing where you have the feeling that, no matter what happens there, it's not going to, ruin everything else. That's very important. But sometimes that's just sort of like playtime, and we're not going to take it seriously. So I think as much as we need to think about digital leadership, we also need to think about digital citizenship. And what is it that we want people to try to do? And if we want them to try to do these things, then what is it that leaders are obligated to do to make it such that those experiments, those risks, that playtime even, that it could become valuable? Because if it doesn't, the people who create that value will leave. And if it's an organization, they'll leave the organization. If it's a functional unit and there's a better place within the organization, they'll go there. And if it's a country, they'll leave the country.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So culture is obviously a huge topic, and is significant. I think I say this quite a lot, and Mark, I know you've heard me say this a couple of times, but what we've found in the kind of the work that we've done is traditionally when we work with organizations, they kind of have the budget, right? And they want to spend on the technology and the other elements that come with implementing and driving the technology and running the sandbox exercise, all that kind of stuff. But when you start thinking about the change program, the skills program that is meant to run side by side to that, you're traditionally seeing a tenth of the cost going into that end of the transformation. And the reality for what we're seeing and what we advise clients, and I know we've talked about this at length, is our view is you should be spending, if it's $1 on technology and transformation, then it should be $1 on change and people and skills, right? And it has to be thereabouts, and if not, more so on technology and skills. So I think you're absolutely right, and the points really do resonate, and they resonate to a point where I've just had a number of these different conversations with clients, and we grapple with it. And I think the complexity really comes when senior stakeholders are trying to get someone to get the job done, but are slightly disconnected in some cases. So
yeah,
really.
But Maz, also there's an irony with this, right? And which is we talk about the importance of culture, but then we talk about the need for organizations to provide control and oversight and assurance. So that all comes into the mix. But when you actually look at 70% of digital transformations fail to meet their really intended benefits. And when you look at that 70%, 88% of that probably is down to humans in some shape or form. Surely the risk and assurance and all those other things aren't working anyway, right? In that context. So to Mark's point, knowing when to turn the taps on and when to turn them off, I think is critical. And I think organizations that are leading in this area now are now using AI and understanding of networks and understanding of social connectivity and understanding of predictive behavior to, I wouldn't say control it completely, but at least tip the playing field a bit more in their favor.
Yeah, no, I agree. Definitely. I think, and also, I think, do you think some of this is just down to learning and education? So just over time, organizations are just getting more comfortable around putting the guardrails at risk and the other areas, and now it's time to understand the change. But it took the time it's taken to over the period to get to that point where they're comfortable with it.
I think it's really unique to each particular industry and the challenges they face. For example, if you're in a regulated environment, it has to be in your DNA to be able to control and understand risk, and reversing that is a very, very difficult process, even if the pandemic is causing you to have to respond. The natural tension in the elastic band is to pull you back into risk control when that immediate threat has passed. But I think for others, it has really enlightened them as to what they can achieve in a relatively short pace of time if they remove bureaucracy, for example, if they improve the levels of collaboration between people, if they increase diversity. nothing bad ultimately happens, or at least they're aware of what the risk of those things can be and can manage proportionately. And I think it's really that level of proportionment that sits at the heart of what we're talking about here with risk. And I think sometimes the level of proportionment has been inflated somewhat based on history and the environmental context in which an organization will operate.
Yes, great. So look, I've got to change gears because my time's gone out the window. I put a little note of how I'm going to be running. So I just need to change gears to the next question, which is really focused around starting thinking about measurement, which again, a huge topic up and down the organization. But this one's for you, Hisham, from my perspective, I think, and I know you've been thinking about this. So how can you measure digital value realization, and how important is it to be able to measure it accurately?
Yes, thank you, Maz. Definitely, any project or digital project programs will have a specific outcome, either financial or improving customer experience, or related to regulations, or related to specific privacy. So there's a mix we have to understand. It's not always an ROI of financial. It might be in different varieties of tangible and non-tangible outcomes. Now, back to the prioritization, this is something equally important. So measurement and prioritization, it comes as what value you are expecting from a digital intervention, okay? What impact it will have on specifically improving your customers. So these are the dimensions we're looking into. How this will be impacting our customers, how this will be impacting the financials, and then you will see the possibilities of being able to get this as a quick win, or being able to get this as a long-term strategic goal. So the best approach in what we call measurement is to set these criteria earlier in the project setting, okay? Define, I mean, any program that you will launch will have a set of financial investment for it. And that you need to calculate specifically your outcomes, okay? Either tangible or non-tangible. Once you calculate, then you start to measure. And then when you start to measure, you have to continuously measure until the program is live. And then post live, you have to continuously demonstrate the value to the stakeholders. Okay, then that comes to the culture shift, by the way. Demonstrating the value, okay, I could look into many cases where we've done with the program, everyone is happy, but then we didn't go efficiently in communicating the outcomes. And then people started to say, well, look, we invested in this and that. And you know, you kind of get that feeling of that this was not necessary, okay? So it's very critical to demonstrate the value once you go live and post live, and then continue to measure your incremental changes, because once you go live with any kind of digital intervention or program, you have to continuously show the value, you have to continuously invest. Digital is always about building blocks. It's never ending. It's a journey. It's something you have to continuously, if you go live with a certain, if a simple example of an e-commerce, it's not the end of the road. You have to do digital signature, you have to do optimization of fulfillment, you have to do many things that comes later. So continuously measure your outcomes, continuously demonstrate to your stakeholders, including leadership, including front lines, what are the values, what are the benefits that you are harvesting from these kind of digital intervention.
No, I completely agree. I think measuring is absolutely critical. I think the challenge really comes is how you put certain value on these things. But Mark, from your perspective, how close do you think you can get to real-time monitoring of risk, project health, and digital value realization?
I suppose it depends which dimension of risk you're kind of thinking about. I'm going to slightly answer that in a way that I think isn't really what you're asking, but you know, I really agree with what you're saying, Hisham. But I also think that not every kind of investment that you're making in something new can be measured by the same sort of regime. So, for example, 2 years ago, we had a lot of the infrastructure to be able to do it. It didn't work as well as it does now, but we had a lot of the infrastructure that we now use to work remotely, but we didn't use it. And it really wasn't, you know, on that list of 100 things that you talked about, which is so true. It probably wasn't the top 5, you know, at very many organizations, or top 10. And then the world, as you say, you know, so much of this is about dealing with the way things are going right now with COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything. And it pushed everyone to rethink what those priorities were. So it seems to me it's very important to think, okay, what's happening that I need to be responsive to in the environment? And then as you do that, some of the things that you're going to invest in are going to be highly innovative and speculative, and you don't know how it's going to work. So, you know, we weren't trying to make employees more productive. We were trying not to lose everyone in the whole business. This is a very different deal. So how do you, I mean, you're talking about not going over a cliff versus ensuring that your investment gets you an incremental gain of productivity. Those are not the same kind of project. And I think in our sort of planning call, Mazzy, somebody said, I don't remember who it was, that, you know, some of this is like getting kind of a social movement going. So when you're talking about, you're at that end of kind of the innovation scale, and you just don't want to lose people, or you want to get people into a new mode of thinking. One of the ways I think you measure things is by saying, how many people are doing this thing at all? And that leaves you a question, which is, why do we care? What are we going to get out of that? And there's a loose linkage sometimes between that, because you need to let people just start to do the new thing and then innovate. And if I could sort of break it down, it seems like a lot of what digitalization is we have all of this kind of digitized data feed about how people and systems are doing whatever it is that they do. And we're trying to join that up and get people to see insights in it that allow us to devise better ways of doing business that better meet people's needs and work better for people who are doing this work. And in order to make that happen, you've got to get people engaging these different data feeds and looking for insights from them. And so getting, you know, the sheer number of eyeballs onto those problems is one measure that doesn't sound very ROI-ish yet. But, you know, I think that there is, in every innovation, there's a point where there's sort of an article of faith moment. You know, do you believe this is going to lead you in the direction you want to go? And a lot of great investments have been killed by overly stringent ROI measures before it's time. So separating out, you know, when you have to use that versus when you have to use a different type of measure. It's not, do we not measure, but it's how do you think about what to measure?
Mm. But I think as also there is a point around what do we mean by value, and Mark's touched on that there. Really, the value of value is changing in organizations. It's no longer about, you know, profitability, not even necessarily productivity, as Mark was explaining. I think we live in a world now where value is increasingly intangible. So if you think about book value, for example, of a business, how much more value is attributable to the non-things that you put on the balance sheet? And people being a huge part of that, right? Well, for the time being, I think we'll get to a point where we might start seeing people as a source of value and how it's accounted for. But in the meantime, I really urge organizations to do, you know, a very simple piece of work, which is to think about how value flows from the top to the bottom across multiple dimensions, and think about where you find the signals for that, because the signals are there. You don't necessarily need to apply a human designed construct or methodology for trying to measure ROI in real time. Let the signals do the work. And that's something that DigiWorks has been working on. We have a platform in that space, which is fairly new and innovative and showing really promising results about showing where the signals point you to categories of risk, showing where the signals point you to evaporation of value. And it's not just necessarily the financial or the ROI piece, but it can be around people's belief in your program. It can be people's belief and understanding in the purpose of what you're trying to do as an organization. It can be softer things as well. So certainly from my perspective, I think this is an area of huge growth, a huge opportunity, and where organizations are still fairly traditional when they're thinking about how to measure ROI. And I think that's going to shift massively over the next 3 to 4 years.
I agree. The reality is I think we're going to go through a learning curve, right? Some things are going to work and some things aren't going to work. And I think up until you kind of embark on it and trial it and think about it and are grappling with it and thinking about different ways of measuring it, you're never going to get to a conclusion, right? But there was a time when people were just saying, give me the value, and then trying to find value, but without really talking to people. And I think our level of maturity around how we think about values has certainly risen, but I think we have some way to go. Thank you. Lawrence. So look, just in terms of time, I've got one more question, which I'm going to try to do at pace because I'm really keen to get people's answers on this, but also I'm conscious that everybody's probably allocated an hour, so we need to try not to overrun on this one. But this one kind of it kind of lends itself to acceleration, right? So and the first question actually for you, Hisham, is what are the most important actions leaders can take to scale up digital projects beyond MVP to create like wide scale transformation in your view?
Yes, thank you, Maz. Very important, I think, question, and very critical to the success of the digital transformation is the acceleration. Now, the best acceleration sponsor we had is the pandemic, and this is something that demonstrated many initiatives, in fact, that were not even planned, were launched during the pandemic. And we seen programs that helped respond to the safety of our employees or our customers that was not even on the radar of the organization. So in that way, acceleration by the use of specific technologies like low-code platforms, cloud platforms, this we could see a surge that happened maybe during the pandemic. And these capabilities were really mastering the capabilities of really responding very fast to customer needs, employee engagement. And I mean, for us at Abdulatif Jameel, we run what we call a health gadget program that we ask our associates to respond on 3 times a week on a short survey about safety and their health, and in case of any response they need for if anyone gets infected by corona. So this was launched in like 10 days, the program, and we until today we measure around maybe close to 1 million sensing from our employees continuously. So that was launched in an extreme fast way. We continuously evolved the program and many initiatives. Today, acceleration, you have to, with all the 4 areas, Maz, you mentioned in the article, are critical. The culture, the prioritization, the agility. This is agile program deployment. How fast you're gonna do this on real life. Softening the ROI, as Mark highlighted. And there are things, yes, definitely, we went without even looking at an ROI. It's a necessity, it's sometimes a regulation we have to do. There is no exit from it. ROI is meaningless in that area. So the pace comes from acceleration, from a solid case that we have today, responsiveness to the needs of the pandemic. And acceleration also requires softening the internal restrictions of the organizations. If you have too many layers of approvals, asking for something simple, but then you go through the traditional channels of approvals, these are the things that we need to watch for.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I think the point around kind of low code, no code, and being able to work on the cloud, I just can't get behind that enough. I think the more we can empower individuals to be able to develop solutions to their issues. I talk quite a lot to some of the finance and procurement functions that we work with at the moment, and we're finding that a lot of the challenges that exist within the function, and sometimes the best owner to own the solution to that problem is the person in the function that understands the issue. So the more you can enable them and give them the tools and put the tools in their hands and give them the permission to play, then the more likelihood you have of successful results in our view. So look, gentlemen, we've actually got a poll next, and we've actually got the feedback from the poll. So the poll is, which of the following is most important to accelerate digital value creation? Balancing the portfolio of digital projects, embedding digital culture and skills, or rapidly scaling digital projects across the business. Now, on that poll, the answer came at 67% of embedding digital culture and skills. So, Mark, do you have any comments on that?
I think I want to repeat something that Hisham just said, because I think it's so incredibly important. I think when people do get around to saying, let's really pay attention to the culture and do what the poll suggests we should do, it's when they feel it's unavoidable, it's critical, it's the priority of the day. And we've just seen, it's true, as you say, Hisham, that the pandemic has been kind of the friend of digitalization in some macabre, sad, terrible way. But at the same time, it gives an incredibly important thing for digital leadership that people who aspire to it, and that would be find the crisis, see it, act on it. Too many times people are failing to go with innovations because they just don't see or feel that. And if you're of a certain age and you don't get what's happening with people who are younger than you, then that's probably the place you need to be looking. If everyone is saying something, you don't understand it, probably that's where the crisis is.
Yes, great answer. Great answer, Mark. So look, Mark and Hisham, we've actually we've got one final poll, and I'm gonna rush through it because I think it's important that everybody get a view of the poll and the answers, because the answers have come back too. So I'm just going to turn through the page. So excuse me as I look at multiple screens and try to navigate the different screens on LinkedIn here. So the final poll, which is poll C, is which digital innovations have done the most to accelerate citizens of the kingdom up the curve since the pandemic? Now, before we go into the answers to that, Lawrence, do you want to talk for a moment around the curve, if you've got a second, and then I can disclose the answers and what came out.
Yeah, just very quickly then. The curve is about understanding the ability of organizations to maximize value from digital, right? So bearing in mind that everything or every part of the journey will start with building awareness of customers and employees and citizens about what we actually need from digital. Then it's having the skills, the knowledge, the experience, the confidence, the cultures to actually do something with that knowledge. And then the final part is what we call the affirmation, the ability to expand that sort of ecosystem of digital partners, venturing partners into an environment that you really understand the value that you can drive, and you are accelerating behavior to scale digital. Now, in that context, we obviously have had in the pandemic world that we've been in for the last 18 months, 2 years, a massive acceleration up the beginning and mid part of that curve. So that's the context for this model.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. So the questions posed were digital cashless payment systems, digital health applications, digital retail and shopping, and digital learning solutions? And the answers are as follows. The digital cash payment systems, 33%, digital health applications, 33%, digital retail shopping, 17%, and then 17% again for digital learning solutions. Sorry, I can't pull that up. That's just come up on my screen here. So Hisham, what are your thoughts on that then, given you're a citizen in the kingdom?
Yeah, definitely. These are indicators of what's happening in the market. If you look at the e-payments, just before the pandemic, we used to talk about cash on delivery for e-commerce, and this was in the range of 65 to 75% of e-commerce, and probably comparing to other countries, it's extremely high cash on delivery. Today, an incredible shift from paying through cash to e-payments, mobile payments, Apple Pay. You could name many different things that emerged. The way you pay by today your debit or credit card without even putting your numbers like the code, they enabled up to example $100 that you don't need to put the PIN code. Why? Because this is increasing safety for you. You don't need to really go and pin your code. So e-payment today, with the support again of the e-government programs, this comes hand to hand. The government pushed extremely through the health app that was taking the second Tawakkalna, and the e-payments. These are, I would highlight the two major moves that were incredibly and astonishing. The speed of really giving this to the citizens was amazing, and continuous improvement. You see updates just happening on the fly.
Yeah, no, fascinating. Look, I've been massively impressed by Tawakkalna because I kind of transitioned to Saudi from the UK kind of mid pandemic. So I had the NHS app and then got the Tawakkalna app, and I have to say I was super impressed. And it's just you manage your whole health on the app, right? And you're able to kind of see where you're going, where others have been, and whether you've been in contact. So I think it's you're absolutely right. And I'm already talking to colleagues at work here around how everything was cash it, and then literally less than 12 or 18 months ago, before the pandemic, even deliveries that came, you can select paying on cash when the delivery arrives. And I come from the UK, where in the UK actually all of that had gone cashless. So when you see it happen and the time you see it kind of transform, I think is really fascinating. So yes, I think that's good. Thank you for sharing that, Hisham. So look, guys, we're at the end of the hour. We're out of time. So I just wanted to conclude by just thanking all the panelists and the guests for listening, but panelists for participating in the conversation. I really enjoyed the conversation and your inputs and your views on it. And I look forward privately to continue these conversations with you, and as these evolve, continue feeding our research. For kind of all the guests, please feel free to download the guide and use it. There have been a number of questions that have come through the chat, which I'm unable to view on my screen, but I've just had a text from one of my colleagues saying there's some questions on there. So what I'll try to do is respond to them. Mark, one of them's for you, and Hisham, the other's for you. So we'll try to respond to them over email in the back channels. Finally, thank you all for your time. And if there's any last words, feel free. I think I've just been told I can run over 1 or 2 minutes because most people are still logged on. So if there's any last words that you want to add, then feel free, Mark, Lawrence.
Just to thank you for inviting me to this important conversation. It's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, echo that absolutely, Maz. Really appreciative of the opportunity to talk on this really important topic. Thank you.
Right, guys, have a great day. All the best.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.